The video we're talking about today is going to be about the Redmi Note 10 series, specifically the Redmi Note 10S, which was their latest launch from the Redmi Note 10 series. We're going to be figuring out where this phone really sits and compare it briefly to the Redmi Note 10 Pro, which is the highest level in the Redmi Note 10 series. So keep watching to find out. First of all, just for context, the Redmi Note 10 series alone came with the Redmi Note 10, Redmi Note 10 Pro, Pro Max in some regions, Redmi Note 10 5G, and the Redmi Note 10S. That's a total of 5 different smartphones coming out for the same series, very close to each other with very minimal differences. This makes it very confusing for consumers to pick the right one. Now we understand that what they're trying to do really is to appeal to different segregations of the market at different price points and satisfy each individual niche, I guess. Obviously, having every smartphone satisfy each column of user behavior to give them prices that would make more sense for them or the next user with different features that fit into that is great and all, but when you're releasing 5 different phones within the same series, it gets kind of overwhelming and frankly a bit ridiculous when you're picking a new smartphone. That brings us to the Redmi Note 10S. We reviewed all the other ones, and then when we got this one, it was just confusing. It's like, why do we need to do the same review where they've changed up the specs a little bit? And this doesn't even appeal that much to us as reviewers because we usually go for different price points to understand what makes sense for what. With this one, even we were confused. So when it comes to the specs on the Redmi Note 10S, you get a 6.43-inch AMOLED dot display with a refresh rate that's locked at 60 Hz. It's not even 90 Hz. The front of the display also houses a 13 megapixel front camera, which is pretty standard. You get a fingerprint sensor built into the power button, and that's pretty much everything else. Externally looks like every other Redmi device. At the back of the phone, you get a 64 megapixel main shooter, an 8 megapixel ultra wide, a 2 megapixel macro lens, as well as a 2 megapixel depth sensor. The processor that this phone is running is the MediaTek Helio G95 that comes equipped with a 5000 mAh battery. As mentioned earlier, the price difference between the Redmi Note 10S and the Redmi Note 10 Pro, here in Malaysia at least, is just $100. That just blows my mind as opposed to the specs on the Redmi Note 10 Pro, which I will tell you now. So in contrast, the Redmi Note 10 Pro has a 6.67-inch AMOLED display with 120 Hz of refresh rate and HDR10+. You also get a 16 megapixel front camera as opposed to the 13 on the 10S. Connectivity-wise, layout-wise, they all look pretty much exactly the same. The camera at the back of the phone is a 108 megapixel sensor for the Pro Max variant, and you get an 8 megapixel ultra wide, a 5 megapixel tele macro lens, as well as a 2 megapixel depth sensor. The macro lens on the 10S, the 2 megapixel one, honestly useless. Get rid of it, no one wants it. The biggest differences between both of these devices obviously is going to be their processor. One has the MediaTek processor, the other has the Qualcomm Snapdragon processor. This is where you see a little bit of difference. We're going to link something down in the description for you guys to check out the performance difference between both of these processors. But in a general picture, the MediaTek seems to be performing a little bit better than the Snapdragon. It's rated a little bit higher because it's more power efficient, and overall the longevity of it might be slightly better than the Snapdragon. But honestly, it really comes down to which one you're really picking. What do you buy a smartphone for? You see, the biggest problem we have here is that Xiaomi is aggressively releasing a lot of these phones, making it very confusing for any user, whether you're existing or a brand new user, to make the right call. Not to mention, it's also a little bit redundant because at this price point where there's a difference of just 100 or 200 bucks, it doesn't make sense for me to go for the cheaper one. I'd rather just go for the older one, which has slightly better specs, than go for the cheaper, newer one. Now, a lot of people think that the Redmi Note 10S is merely a decoy effect to get people to buy the Redmi Note 10 Pro or the higher end ones. But honestly, I feel like Xiaomi tried their best to get you to pick the best one to satisfy your needs. But because of that, they kind of created this rift as a little bit of a problem in the thinking of users because you're not really able to pick the best one for you, especially considering the fact that the differences in specs are so minimal that, you know, they're almost exactly the same. So in conclusion to this rant slash breakdown video, smartphone manufacturers, please just focus on the quality of your lineups rather than populating your lineups with a bunch of different products. We don't want quantity, we want quality within certain price ranges, especially as a reviewer. When you get to see so many of these devices and the differences being so minimal, it becomes a little bit frustrating to get out the same differences, same points, same tests, because they're exactly the same. It just doesn't make any sense. Just to reiterate guys, if you're picking between the Redmi Note 10s and the Redmi Note 10 Pro, I would personally recommend, if you're more into the camera side of things and you go on social media a lot and you take a lot of pictures, or you just like using your phone as a regular phone, you're not crazy into gaming, go for the Pro because it can handle pretty much everything you put under the spectrum of what you would do with a smartphone. The Redmi Note 10s on the other hand, if you're looking for a good camera, forget about it. It's not a very good camera, but if you're looking for a good performance for gaming and stuff, then yeah, sure, it's a pretty great phone. With that being said, if you guys enjoyed this style of video, please let us know in the comments below. What do you think about smartphones manufacturers releasing so many different variants of the same phone over and over? Does it frustrate you as much as it frustrates us? Because it's becoming a problem. But if you enjoyed this video, be sure to hit that like button and we'll see you again in the next video. Until then, bye.